Get everybody in here. Good morning. Hope everybody's doing good. Getting ready to try some new stuff here this morning. See what we can do. Got some of our class grades done for the full-time employee. If you are still waiting, if you're alphabetically further, you might not have your grade yet. Don't worry, I'm working on them. Everybody's stuff's looking really good. Let me know if you're having problems, you need help with something, so we can get you all fixed up here for the rest of the semester. You can see all of our assignments. The end is in sight. Yay! So we have a few more things we've got to learn before we can really do our group project. And the first thing is kind of learning about using web stuff with C#. So that's what we'll be looking at today. Let me get everybody marked for attendance. We're going to be referring to the appendix from our textbook, and I have it loaded on Canvas. If you can find it, that's what we'll be looking at. Kind of like the second book to our book. Hope everybody stayed healthy. So far, so good. Don't see Don. Ivy. Let's see. Mary and Richard are both at home. Missing Stuart and Dawn. I don't see it this morning. I'm going to save that. But you guys know what I'm doing here. Okay, so did you find that PDF document? I'm going to get it open too because I've got some of it up here, but I'm going to get all of it. So we're in lesson 13. Lesson 12, your unit exam, you know all that stuff is due Wednesday night. There's Stuart. Let me get him in here. And again, I didn't do that to try to give you stress, but to try to make it to where you don't have any of that stuff hanging over your Thanksgiving holiday. But I'm looking for this PDF here, this C# Pro Appendix, and that's what we're going to get started on today. So we've talked about hang on. Uh-oh. Is it letting you see it? Oh, good, because I'm getting an internal server error, but I've already loaded it up once, so I know it's out there. So if it doesn't show it to you, kind of refresh or something. We're looking for page about 83. Is that right? Close. Page 86. is where we're going to get started with ASP.NET web forms. That's okay. Okay, let's see. Rich, we're on page 86 of the appendix. And let's see, Jackie's asking about how long break is, and that's a really good question. Since we don't have class Wednesday, I really won't see you guys again for 2 weeks, because next week, the whole week is Thanksgiving. So give us a good chance to get recuperated, right? Eat a lot. We've got a little baby turkey, so I guess that's what we'll make. It'll be fun. So today, besides looking at ASP.NET, I'd also like to look at Regex. And we'll see if we have time to do both. And we may have to be relegated to looking at videos for Regex, because there is a video out there. It's just so much more fun when we're all doing it together. It's like that feedback. So here's a bit of a picture about ASP.NET and components. We were looking last time at ADO.NET, right? We're getting all the acronyms here. ADO.NET stood for Active Data Objects. We use the ADO.NET classes to access databases with their data objects. Now we're going to be looking at ASP.NET, Active Server Pages. So active server pages are kind of an interesting theory. We'll get a little bit more involved as we go through it. But whenever we're working with a web browser as our client, you guys, most of you have had the HTML class or even JavaScript, so you know a lot more about that kind of stuff than I do. I'm okay with that, because I'm not a web developer. But as a front-end developer, you know that you're going to be creating HTML code and JavaScript code embedded in that HTML code. The problem with HTML code and JavaScript code that you guys are probably more than aware of is security, right? Because if I'm a client sitting at a computer running your HTML JavaScript site, I can just copy your code, right? Because your code downloads to my machine to be executed. So if I want to grab that code, I can. So we do things, we like obfuscate that JavaScript code so that it's unreadable and try to make it to where it's harder for people to just grab it. But in the end, we have to be careful about implementing any important secure business policies or business trade secrets in client-side code like that, because it is something that's grabbable. It's easy for us to get and see. So oftentimes for secure implementations, we like some of that code to be run on the server. On our server, we can make sure that code is secure. Nobody can get to it. So the perfect world is we have our front end HTML, JavaScript code, making everything look all awesome and pretty and being super interactive for the user and responsive. But then that front end code communicates with our back end web server. And our backend web server is the one that's aware of all these business secret rules and logic and things that we implement. So we can take that front end HTML interface interaction from the user, and that information that the user enters into that HTML form, the web form, can be transmitted back to the server. The server can work on that data, do some updates, maybe even generate some HTML code or generate some JavaScript code to send back out to that front end, so that now the user can see an updated HTML, JavaScript interface on the client side. So that's the best of both worlds, where we have our wonderful front end working well for our users, using all of the great features and everything that we have, but it's communicating with some back end code that's keeping all of our business rules secure so that we don't have to worry about anybody else using them. Some other things that we get benefit-wise from keeping that code on the server, you guys will see on the OTC schedule, you have another scheduling option that probably a lot of you will be taking, is the PHP class. PHP is the open source kind of alternative, you know, because your PHP code is running on the server. It's going to update or generate HTML code to send back out to the client. So when we're working with a Visual Studio.NET application, that backend is going to be handled by ASP.NET as compared to PHP. So they're kind of two different ways we can implement the same thing. Now, some of the things that are on this picture that are important to point out is whenever we're working with a web browser, we're communicating via HTTP. That's usually our protocol. Hypertext Transport Protocol, the standard protocol that we use to send and receive web page information. So we use that HTTP request to send some information to our web server. Just like we use a HTTP request to ask for a web page to be sent to our machine in the very first place, we can use that HTTP request to send some updates from that web page. Now on our server side, some important components. Because this is a Microsoft environment, we have a Microsoft server or software piece that is controlling this web server. That software piece is IIS, Internet Information Services. He will show up on your certification exam. He will be a question as to what kind of web server is in use in this Microsoft ASP.NET environment, because they like their server, right? So they want to tell, remember its name. So IIS is Microsoft's web server software. You could install that on your Windows 10 machine if you went in and you did the add remove software option and you added IIS. You could actually make your Windows 10 machine into a full web server. But it's a little bit messy to configure, so we won't actually use it for our Visual Studio development. That's why I point out to you, remember that name, because it's like one of the only times we're going to see it. We don't have to install IIS to do our testing. We can just do all of our testing within the Visual Studio environment, and it'll kind of create like a mini web server for us to run our application. So on this back end, again, in our server, we have the, our ASP.NET code that's being handled by the ASP.NET processor, and our .NET framework installed on the server, just like it is installed on our computer, will do any sort of C# processing, anything that we have implemented in our code. So let's look at how we do that. I'm going to turn this off. Oh my goodness, probably driving people crazy, sorry. And I'm going to start up Visual Studio. Now, a couple of people, as I was grading your family, or not your family, excuse me, your employee database, made a comment about you needing the employee ID to be the primary key. So get with me if that's something that you don't understand, so that we can make sure we've got that in place moving forward. Whenever we have a web application, let me bring up this document here, that communication cycle that we have between our client-side web browser and our web server is called the HTTP request response cycle. So that's just our client issues some sort of request, our server does some sort of processing and returns a response. So we have that request response cycle just running repeatedly over and over. So we have to take that into consideration. It's not quite the same as our form being kind of active all the time. They mention HTTP is a stateless protocol. That means that every time we make that trip, that round trip from the client to the server, many of the interaction statistics, variables, data is lost. So we only keep those things whenever we are specifically taking steps to remember information that makes that trip. So if I set up data on my web form, it could just go away when that round trip cycle happens to the server if I don't make appropriate steps for it. So we'll make sure that we get a little bit clearer on that as we look at the different components. Now we're going to be creating a web application. So our web application is just a collection of files. And they say that here on this page 2 of this particular Appendix C. So we just have a bunch of files, you know, .html, .aspx, and .aspx stands for active server pages. So we will see .asp files in our web server folder. And our web application contains all of those files and things to create a web display. But our web server is different. That's the machine that's handling all of the requests and, you know, doing all of those things for us. Now on the next page, they have a beautiful picture of the Iis Administrative Screen. So if you were to install Internet Information Services, you could use the application, and it looks just like a lot of the other Windows administrative tools. And it's very, very user-friendly, and you'd be able to take care of it if you needed to. Iis Express is the IIS instance that will be run for us when we're using Visual Studio. A little bit further in here, we are going to be looking at HTML. Remember, HTML is hypertext markup language. So it's a markup language, so it's tagged. That means that I set begin and end tags to indicate specific states of things. So if I'm looking at an HTML document, I know that I need to find those begin and end tags. Okay, so let's do it. Let's create a project. They say to get started, open Visual Studio and let's create a new project. Under other project types, select Visual Studio Solutions and choose blank solution. So let's try it. I want to create a new project. And I think I'm just going to search for blank. And I don't really want it to be, there's one. This blank solution is what I'm actually looking for. So as you scroll through all of those different templates, kind of ignore all of those ones that are blank solutions for specific project types like Universal Windows applications. We just want this one that says blank solution, create an empty solution containing no projects. Let's try it. I'm going to call this my first web page 1, and create it. Now we've got our empty solution. Let's just add an HTML file to it. So they say to find our Solution Explorer and right click and add a new item. And the item we want is an HTML page. They left it named HTML page 1, so let's just add it. And then we'll see. Now I know some of you might have been using Visual Studio Code for your web dev classes, so you're probably pretty used to it. So just yell if I'm doing something super dumb, but you know, in some cases, just let me do it because I do this stuff all the time. Alrighty, so let's put in a title. Let's say this is my simple web page. Now I don't really have the start option. I have attach. So we'll look at how we could do that. Should be able to run it. Do you see it? Usually, when I've done this before, I've told it that it was that kind of project. I'm going to look at the solutions properties. Let's try view in browser. Now I'm right-clicked on our HTML file in Solution Explorer, and I see that view in browser option. That's not exactly the way we're going to be looking at our web pages, but it will work for the moment until we get fully configured. So you should see your title up there. This is my simple web page, and I think that it just opened in whatever is the default browser. Now we're going to have a lot more options using Visual Studio to specify which browser to use, but we didn't really tell it anything. We said this is just an empty project, so we can get a much more fancy. Alrighty, so we've got our little title in here. We could add an HTML form. They show it to us. In the picture here. An HTML form is a named group of related UI elements typically used to gather user input. So we want to make sure to not confuse an HTML form with the entire display area shown by a given browser, because in reality, the HTML form is more of a logical grouping of widgets between the begin form and the end form tag. So they've created like a little default page for the ID within that form. We could get fancier. So let's see if we can do this, because I've never done it this way before. I've always done it through, say, telling Visual Studio that it was an actual web project to where it set all these defaults automatically. So the way this document is kind of walking through us, we have to kind of go find all these tools. But they say the HTML editor doesn't have a designer surface. To use a designer, you need to use the web forms HTML editor. To do this, close the editor for HTML page 1. Okay, going to do that. And in Solution Explorer, right-click the file and select Open With. And then you should see this list. And we want to use the Web Forms HTML editor. So this one here that says HTML Web Forms. And then if we tell Visual Studio that it's a web page project, all of these defaults will be set, but we've got it set now. So now we're saying this isn't just a HTML file that I want to edit as an HTML file. This is an actual web form, and so I want to have more advanced capabilities. And the advanced capabilities that we can see are down at the bottom. So do you see down there where it's got design, split, and right now it's selecting source? That's because we're looking at the source code for this web form. If I click on the design tab, you'll see it shows me the design mode for my web form, which is pretty unimpressive because I don't have anything on this form right now. It's just a blank page. But if I click split, I can see the code at the top and my design window at the bottom. So we could put some things on our web form. They want us to just put like a little heading that says simple HTML page. If you look at your toolbox, you'll see that you have some HTML tools. So in my toolbox, I could add, some text areas or, headings or images or different things like that to my web form using the drag and drop GUI type of design that I'm used to with Windows Forms. So I'm going to go back to design mode here and show you how you can do it. We would want to have a text area. And then in our text area, if I don't like him, he's got like up down arrows. Let me find something else. Actually, I could just start typing. I'll just put simple HTML page. So it's kind of a little bit more dynamic than a Windows form because I don't actually have to put a label on my workspace to type text into. And that's an area that is always really fun for students whenever we start doing Windows forms, because I am so used to putting a label down to type text into, and you guys have all been doing websites and you're like, what are you doing? So now I'm going to go to source and look at the source code that was put into my HTML code for it. And of course, I don't want it to be a paragraph, so I could make it be a heading. Body. Just make it be H1. So I could change it in either place. I don't want it to be a paragraph. I can change the code here in my source code window, and then when I go back to my design window, I'll see that it's been updated. Or I can change things in my design window, and that'll add the source code. And of course, there's going to be times where, just like any other sort of tool, when we start using the GUI mode design tool, sometimes we're not going to like the source code that's generated. Sometimes the source code will be in the wrong place or embedded under something else. So some people like just typing their straight HTML. That's a perfectly fine option. Let's add a little bit more to this thing. On my HTML page, I want it to say simple HTML page, and then I want it to say, like, please enter a message. Now, if I look at my source, I want to get it somewhat like theirs. I'm looking at page 10 of their document, looking at their source code. They have H1, simple HTML page. Then they have a paragraph, please enter a message. And then after that, they have this form ID equal default page. I guess I got caps lock on. So that looks pretty much like what theirs looks like. Now, the one thing that I do need to change is we want I. Let's look at how that looks in design mode. Please enter a message. made it in italics. So let's build our web form then. I'm going to look at the code here because that's what we've got an example of. But you could navigate with either way. Sometimes, for me, the one reason that keeps me from being an HTML CSS person is that lack of visual response right away. So I am much more productive if I use a design tool like this to get started, and then maybe I go away from it and I don't use it at all. Other people are much more productive just working with code from the very beginning and never using a design tool. Some people would like to use a design tool the whole time from beginning to end. So everybody can be productive in their own way. That's what all of these tools are for. But let's add in our form. So under our form specification, we've said that this form is going to be our default page. I'm going to add a paragraph that's going to have your message, colon, and then we're going to do an input. And when we do this input field, it's very similar to creating a form field with our Windows form. So I could use this input field over here. Let's try it. I'm going to do this first one this way. We'll call it TXT user message. And I'm going to say that its type is text. And that'll end that first paragraph. Now let's go look at the design mode for that. We should see that we have an input control. There it is. Now we can see that text box. And if I click on it, kind of like using the Windows Forms GUI, my properties window displays. And here's the ID that we gave that form, TXT user message. So we can use our properties window to specify the properties for that text field. So it's kind of a mixture, right, of the things that you've learned in your web dev and some of the Windows Forms capabilities. Now we want to add a couple of buttons. So instead of doing them in our code, let's try to use the controls. Here's a button input. I'll put one on my form down here. Now I want this button to be named, or its ID to be Btn show. Its type should already be set to button. Yep, because we picked a button control. And we want its value, which is kind of like its text property, to say show, exclamation point. Now I want another button. So I'll drag that button to it. Now notice how it just smooshed that button right up against that other one. I'm going to Control Z. And if I click in my designer and just like press space a little bit, kind of get my cursor to the position where I want to add that new button before I add it, then I can control that a little bit more so that it's not so directly right up against that previous one. Now this second button is going to be Btn Reset. And again, we want its type to be button, which should already be set. And we want its value to be reset. Now I'm going to look at the source code that was generated and make sure that my buttons are kind of like in the right place. Oops, see, and they're not inside my form. So I'm going to drag this form end tag down to after my buttons because I want them to be inside of that form, or at least that's what the code shows. and I don't want to mess it up. So now I'm going to make sure, looking at my design window, that it hasn't mangled anything. It looks fine. Okay. So we can view it again if we want in our browser. Again, I'll right click and choose view in browser. And again, at this point, yeah, I want to save my changes. At this point, it's going to use, they say Edge, but I think it's using the default. So I should be able to type some things. Hello. You know, I can do you this way. Let's maybe show. It doesn't do anything, right? Because we haven't put any code anywhere. But we built our form pretty quickly. So whenever we're working with this web form editor, we have this split screen capability that gives us the ability to be looking at our code while we're looking at design mode. So that's really, really handy. So we can do some client-side scripting. Let's do it. Whenever we're looking at our client side here, which is what our HTML file is, any code that we associate with this HTML or our client-side stuff is going to run on the client's machine, right? That's why they call it client-side. That means it's going to download to their machine. That means they get our code, right? We are sending it to them. Would you like our code? Here you go. We'll push it down to your machine so that you have it. And if you would like to keep it, go right ahead. So let's see how easy it is for us to do the client-side code. I'd like to create a little button or something so that we can see, we could use our client-side code for lots of really important things, like validating our user input, you know, making sure that the data that's going to be sent to the server is in the shape that we want it to be. So we could intercept some events. Let's say we wanted our button to actually do something on the server, but we could make it do something on the client side too before it sent something onto the server. So let's try it. They say to capture the click event for the show button, update the definition of the Btn show widget to support an on-click attribute. So let's do it. I'm going to do it. We could do this in many places, but let's do it in our source code since that's what they've given us. Now I want to find my show button. Here it is. And in my show button right now, the code that we have so far is specifying the ID for our button, what kind of widget type it is, and what its value is. Let's add some more. So on our button, let's add an on-click event. And we're going to say, if this button gets clicked, let's run btn show underscore on click. Oops, I've got my CLICK, and it's going to be an event or method, so I'll put my open and close parenthesis. I've got a bunch of weird spaces here. I'll get rid of those. So now I've just added an event to my button. So if somebody clicks that button, run this code. Now let's add the little JavaScript function. It says directly after the opening head element. I'm going to add some JavaScript code, script type equal text / JavaScript. So we're going to set up our little function here. btn show on click. And in my function, I just want a pop-up. So I'm going to say alert and use a little window. Oops. And display this value. Okay, JavaScript people, tell us if that looks accurate. So we've just added a little function here. It says, note that the scripting block has been wrapped within a CData function. The reason for this is simple. If your page ends up on a browser that does not support JavaScript, the code will be treated as a comment block and ignored. Of course, your page may be less functional, but the upside is that your page will not blow up when rendered by the browser. In any case, if you view your page in a browser once again, you should be able to type a message and see it pop up in a client-side message box. Let's try it. So this is our show. We just want to show our message. I better save it. I get so mad about it. Now let's see if I can view in browser. Here's my simple web page. I'll say hello and show. Does yours do anything? Anybody's work? Okay. But we won't worry about it too much because that's not really our purpose here in life. If somebody gets it working, let me know. Now, they say that our reset button should clear everything because it was created with type equal reset. Well, we created it with the GUI, so the type got set to button. Let's change that type to reset. Let's see, we have our txt user message, and in our code, we're displaying that txt user message dot value. Seems like everything should work. I don't see any typos. So I'll just have to say, well, failure at the JavaScript. So let's move ahead. Whenever we're looking at this client-side code, working or not, oh, let me look at my design mode and see if it gives me any clues. Nope. Look at that. Script is missing this. Is that it? Seriously? So I don't know how you guys can do this stuff in other tools without error messages. You're better than me. I can hardly do it with error messages because I'm like, well, I just don't know. Okay, so does that fix it? Woohoo! I love it when things work, you know. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Aaron. Let me admit some people here. Everybody's debugging for me. That's what I need. All right, so we created our first Visual Studio HTML web page, and we made this thing be all client side. But the beauty of being able to do this with Visual Studio is the server side aspect, because we want to be able to perform our processing on the server. So on page 14, they start talking about posting back to the web server. Right now, our simple HTML page is doing everything on the client side. If we want any of the data that we enter in our web form to be sent back to the server, we need to make sure that we are telling the system that. Whenever we're looking at our form tag, the action attribute specifies the recipient of the incoming form data. Let's see, look at our form. Right now, we just have our form ID, but we can actually add some additional information. Whenever we're working with web forms-based websites, our .NET framework is going to take care of these posting mechanisms, that sending things back and forth, so that we don't have to worry so much about whether we're posting things or whether things are going to be on the client. We're just going to handle our correct event and let our active server pages take care of things for us, so we don't have to get all involved in the mechanisms of what's going on there. Whenever we're looking at our HTML controls in our toolbox, these are things that are just client side, but we do have other tools that are available to us that'll be server side type controls. So there are some other things that we can do. Okay, so let's start looking at page 15, an overview of the Web Forms API. So if you're there with me on this, we've just kind of been doing our little quick whirlwind review of classic web applications, is what they call it. We're ready to dive into web forms. So we've seen a little bit, you know, we can create these things on the client side, but our true power comes in our code behind file. And whenever we're using ASP.NET, the programming model that we're using is termed code behind. So it allows us to separate our HTML, our presentation logic, from our business logic, our C# code, which, you know, we've been working to try to do. ASP.NET pages are coded using our .NET programming languages. So in our case, it would be C#. We can compile them into DLL assemblies, so we can execute them much faster than we can execute scripts. So besides that security aspect, performance is just as important of a consideration. Web forms controls can be used to build a web user interface in a model similar to our Windows Forms interface. And everybody likes those. Those have been really widely accepted in the industry. So the web forms applications that we can create make use of any of the assemblies that we've already created. So if we have a bunch of stuff for our Windows Forms-based projects, we can use those same class libraries, those same DLLs in our ASP.NET applications. We can access our same tables, our same CRUD code, so we can just pretty much get to everything. So it really gives us a lot of power. Whenever we're working with our user interface of a web form, we can use a lot of web controls to build them. So we'll have a lot of capabilities there. I think that's what we're going to create. Let me skip ahead here. They give a lot of information about different capabilities and wonderful features for you to read through, and all the different versions and how things have been added. Remember, if you're trying to do something and you're not able to, you might be looking at a version difference. Okay, so on page 19, Building a single file web forms web app. Web forms page can be constructed using one of two primary approaches. The first is to build a single .aspx file that contains a blend of server-side code and HTML. That's kind of what we have here, right? Only we have a blend of our JavaScript and HTML code. We could create a .aspx file that was that same kind of thing that would have a blend of those two. If you're building a web page that doesn't have very much code, but a lot of static HTML, a single file page model might be easier to work with because you can see the code and the markup in one unified ASPX file. On the downside, however, the single file page model can lead to some complex files because you're talking about your user interface markup and your programming logic all be in one location. So here our goal is that we're going to build an ASPX file that displays the inventory table of our AutoLot database. Let's see if we can do it. Let's close this project. So do File, Close Solution, because we don't want any leftovers. Now I want to create a new project. And this time, instead of creating the empty type thing, we're going to create a Visual C# web app. So I'm going to search for web. They want ASP.NET web application. So I think that this one I'm looking at with .NET framework should be okay. Hang on though. Sorry, we've just got so many different templates than what they used to have. I kind of think we should pick this empty one, ASP.NET empty website. But they want I'm going to choose ASP.NET web form site because they said they were going to do web forms. If we have to switch it around, we will, but let's try that one. That appears to meet all of our requirements. We're going to call this then single page model. And create. Now you'll see that because it's using the template, it will create a lot more stuff than what our empty project did. Oh, this just has a bunch of stuff. Yeah, let's close this one and create a new one. This is too much junk. We're going to just pick that empty one. Close solution. Don't save. Create a new project. I'm just going to try this ASP.NET web application. It's closest to what they're saying, what they're calling for. Single page model. E2. That looks better. Now this is more like what we were expecting to see based on their instructions. And so we would like to create an empty project template. these more advanced applications will really generate a lot of code and a lot of features for you. So you can try working with some of them, because you can get some things generated that are just pretty well complete applications that are actually very high level that you can change pretty quickly. Okay, now we want to use our Windows Explorer to copy the Autolat DAL directory from chapter 22 or from the download directory for this chapter. So I should have that. Hang on. Okay, this should be very similar to the one we were working on last time. I'm going to zip it up. And try to post it on Discord and our general channel. Can you see it? I think it went. Okay, just to make sure we all have the same exact version. Now, for this project, when you get it, let me make sure what they want us to do with it. So we're going to copy to add the project into the solution by right-clicking the solution, selecting Add Existing Project, and choosing the Auto.dal project. So I want to download this zip file, and I can just leave it in my downloads folder. I got it a couple of times. I'll get rid of that extra. And in my downloads folder, I'm going to extract it. So now I should have the original download, and I have the extracted auto.dal project folder in my downloads folder. So in this solution then, I want to add an existing project. I'm going to go to my downloads folder. And I've got the auto.dal folder. And I'm going to keep opening, right? Because I'm not exactly sure which project they want. So I'm going to pick this one that contains the other three. Open. Oh, it's going to make me keep opening. So as I open folders and drill down, I finally get to the auto.dal C# project file, .csproj, and that's the file type it's looking for to import an existing project. So I'm going to say OK. OK. And now I should see my auto.dal project in my Solution Explorer, along with my web page. Now I want to add a reference to the auto.dal project. So in our single page model, let's add our reference to that new project that we just included. Now, our web page should now be able to access all of the models and things. We might need to import those other projects. We'll see as we go. I'm not going to go ahead and automatically import them all. I want to make sure we really have to, because they're DLL libraries. We might not even need to bring them in here if they were properly imported into this AutoLot.dal project. So we'll just try it and see what happens. They don't specifically say that we need to import the others, so we'll try not to. Now we're going to need to make a little change to the AutoLot.dal project. They say first, add a reference to system.web. The constructor for the database logger doesn't specify a directory, which will cause the code to fail in a website because of a lack of permissions. This has to be updated to point to the physical directory of the website. In the system.web namespace, there's a server variable called http runtime.appdomain.apppath that contains the physical directory of the website. So let's see if we can find this. In the EF folder, open autolot entities.cs, there it is, and add a using for system.web and change the database logger initializer. What do you think? It looks like we need to import those other projects, doesn't it? Sure, I'm getting a lot of errors. Let's do it. So in my solution, I'm going to add existing project, and I'm going to get my AutoLot.dal models. So let's see my database logger. Let's see, I've got a lot of stuff that's commented out. I don't think we should need that third project, but let's add it. Add existing project. Do our test drive. Something isn't right. Let's take a look at the Appendix C stuff here. Here's our single page model. I'm going to zip this up and send it to you. The one that we're attempting here is not cooperating. So I don't know if I just picked the wrong project type, but let's open theirs so that we can see what's going on. I'm going to close my solution, save it all at this point, because I have a feeling that as we look at theirs, we'll see it's a very small problem. And then I'm going to download the single page model zip file. And extract it. Yeah, they only have that auto.dal project in here. So it must be the framework that they chose for that website. Let's see what we've got. Should be okay. And they have it set up using SQL Server Express, which is okay because we could handle that to change it to SQL Server. Let's just take a look at what's going on in this project. So the first thing that I want to look at is the default ASPX. But before we open it, expand it and notice that it's kind of like a form file. Whenever we're looking at an active server page, we can have a code behind file, which means we have a C# file, a .cs file, that goes along with that .aspx file. So let's double click the default .aspx to take a look at it in the editor. And we see all of the HTML code for our form. Let's change it to design mode. We see our cute form here. And if I set it into split, we can see that we've got all of our HTML code showing. Whenever we're looking at this div tag, you notice the grid view that we have going here. The run at tag is really critical because the run at tag says that this field, this form field, being a form, should make the round trip. So it shouldn't just be a client-side data field. Its values should be retained as it's transmitted to the server and back. So this run at equals server changes this widget from being a client-side type data item to being something that has state. Its state is retained as it makes that round trip back and forth from the server. Now let's look at the C# behind the scenes file there. Not much to it, huh? Is there anything in this designer.cs? Nope. We do have our grid view that's connecting us to our cars grid view. So now you can see why I wanted you to do that grid view assignment where you were displaying that data so that you could see that connection. Now, if I try to run it, I'm going to have trouble because I don't have an SQL Server component. But we should be able to look if we wanted to and view any of the class files or anything that's in this website. So when our website loads, if we were looking at an HTML site, we would be looking for like index.html, a file named like that. And whenever we're working with an active server page, we're looking for the default.aspx file as the startup file. So we don't have a lot going on with it. We could go through and change our data access logic to get our cars from our SQL Server database. But I think our time would be better served today looking at our registry editor. And then I can take a look at this one and see how much it takes to get it converted to our SQL Server. Just kind of want you to know that this capability exists, We're not going to really get into it very deep. So just sort of a quick introduction so that you can see that we have the HTML files, we have our C# code behind files. Get you a little bit better of an example next week, but this one all looks good. Okay, so let's switch modes here and let's look at the registry. Regular expression. Sorry, I said that wrong. Rich got it installed, and then I said, well, that's about it for that. Welcome to computer programming. Okay, I finally got myself back here. Module 13, the one that I want to look at is this regular expression web chapter. And I swear every time I look at Regex, I see some sort of registry editor, too many years in PC maintenance. So I'll try not to say that wrong thing, but I do a lot. So regular expressions, what are they? Well, if you go Google them, you're going to find out that they're a really big thing. Let's search regular expression. A regular expression is something that we can use, a sequence of characters that defines a search pattern. I love the Wikipedia explanation. That's a really good explanation. It's a rational expression. So the sequence of characters define the search pattern. So it's not like a find and replace type thing. It's like a validate thing. So here's an example. They've got this validation pattern where we can say, I'm going to put square brackets around a series of things, and this character could be any of those things. So what we're doing with regular expressions is trying to validate user input to match some sort of pattern. An example might be like a telephone number where we allow users to type in dashes in between the prefix and the area code, or we allow them to type parentheses. No matter what they type, we analyze it to make sure it's a valid pattern, and we convert it to the pattern that we want. Well, the analyzing to make sure it's a valid pattern can be done through a regular expression. So the document that's included in your Canvas lesson is an older chapter talking about regular expressions. So I'm going to download this and get it open on my other screen. And I want to open Visual Studio. And this time, I'm just going to create a new console project. I'll call it regular expressions. And when I'm using the regular expression class in C#, I can use this class in a lot of different modes, a lot of different manners. So the first way that we're going to use it is as a class that has methods that will check to see if a pattern matches our expression string. So I'm going to add a using. We're going to add system.text.regular expressions. So that's our using clause for regex. I'd like to kind of maybe use this same project for a couple of examples. So I'm going to rename the program.cs. Let's call this one basic regex is what they've called it. So in our basic regex application here, let's start out by declaring a string. I think I'm going to put in a using for our console so that we don't have to keep typing that. So let's start out with a string. We're going to call this test string. And let's set it to this long sentence to start. Regular expressions are sometimes called regex or regexp. We're going to write line then. The test string is, and then I'm going to do a \n, and let's see, we want our test string to come out with double quotes around it. So I'll do a / double quote. We use old school replacement parameters here. So I'm going to output the words the test string is, and then go to a new line. And on my new line, I'm going to have double quotes, and then this sentence, and then a double quote. So I want to do this like in the old school pattern matching way to kind of review that way of outputting things so that they don't catch you on that MTA exam, because some of their output might be that old style. Now I'm going to write another line out. Oops, this time just a right, not a right line. And we're going to say match E in the test string. Now, because we're going to use the regular expression class, we can actually set up an instance of a regular expression. So the expression that we're going to be using, our new regular expression, is going to be the letter E. That's what we're searching for. This pattern is not very fancy. It's just a letter. So that's our pattern right now, our search pattern. We're just searching for the letter E. So does that match? Let's check. We'll do right line. And then what we want to output is, looking at our expression, I want you to run the match method on it and compare it to our test string. Let's run it. I'm going to do, what is it, Alt F5 that makes it stop? Makes that console. Sorts of weird stuff going on. Okay, so if I do the Alt F5 so that it keeps my console window open, I print out the test string is our string that we're comparing to. Regular expressions are sometimes called regex. And then I've got this match E in the test string. In this output E, it found in the string. Okay, so that output came from our write statement that was running that regex. This one right here, expression.match. So let's do another one. We still have an E in our expression. That time we matched the first E. Let's do another write statement, and we're going to match every E in the test string. to do this, we're going to expect a collection to be returned. So we can use a for each loop to process them. For each my match in expression dot matches. So one match to see if it matches one time, multiple matches to see if it matches more than once. So in our for each loop then, we can write out that match. So like I said, that was a super easy pattern. Let's try it again. I'm going to Alt F5. Control F5. There it is, Control F5, sorry. And I see then that when I match E in the test string, I got the one E. Bless you. If I match every E in the test string, I get a whole bunch of E's. So there were a bunch of E's in that string. So that's using the regular expression class to compare to a pattern. Let's try some more advanced ones. After our for each loop, let's do a little bit more. Let's match the whole word regex in our test string. So we'll output a message. We want to say that we're going to match regex in the test string. I have a heading. Need a closing double quote. We expect a collection again, so we'll go into a for each loop. We're going to use that var data type. This time, we'll name it again my match, but we can actually run the regular expression matches method is a static method. So in this case, we're invoking matches using the class name regex so that we're running a specific static instance of it. And in our matches this time, we're going to say use the test string, but the pattern that I want to match is called regex. So in this case, I did not set up the regex instance and the expression in an earlier way. I just did a straight call and said, do you find this pattern in this string? If so, we can output them in our for each statement. Kind of just the same as the last one. My match. Let's run it. We should see our single E, all of our E's. And then because we use the matches, we do see that regex, that pattern, does occur more than once in our string. So that's another way that we can run it. We can use it just completely separate, standalone as a static class. Let's try something different. What if we wanted to match regex and regexp, and we don't care whether the P is there or not, you know, we just want it to match either way. Let's try it. Here we'll write out a heading, and we're going to say that we want to go to a new line and then match Regex or Regexp using an optional P. For this one, then, again, we can do it within a for each because we're going to get multiples back. We can say return a variable, my match, for everything that's in the return from regex.matches using our test string. Now our expression that we want to compare to is regexp, but the previous character is optional, and that's what the question mark means. So the question mark anywhere in a pattern match specifies that the previous character, the preceding, is optional. Let's write out our output there. Now we should see every time we see regex and regexp. Let's try it. So we've got regex, regexp. The interesting thing to notice is where we got the regexp, notice that it didn't come out twice. It didn't say once that it matched regex and another time it matched regexp, because this pattern makes it to where we're saying, you know, different string characters can match this pattern or not. So the P was optional. It did have the P, so it matched, but it just matched once. So that's pretty fancy. Let's try one more. We'll do a write this time. Oops, I got ahead of myself. We're going to use an alternation to match either cat or hat. This time, we'll go ahead and create an instance of our regex class, and we'll set our pattern match to be open parenthesis with a C, and then the pipe character, which is the shift backslash, and then the H, and then close parenthesis. So that pattern right there says find either a C or an H. So the parentheses enclose the options. The pipe character separates the options. So I'm saying in the first position, there could be either a C or an H. After that, I want there to be an A and a T. Now let's use that regular expression. In a right line, and I'll go down and we're going to start it with a new line, and then they want it to say hat space cat matches, and then our parameter will be 0, but cat hat matches 1. Now, our parameter replacements that we're going to use are going to be our regular expression outputs. So we're going to use expression.match, sending in a string hat space cat. And then our other parameter replacement, we're going to use an expression.match cat, oops, cat, hat. So both of those strings that we're passing in match, right? It's either hat or cat, but we're only using the dot match. So we're only going to get the first match out is kind of the point that they want to make in this one. So let's run it. And since we're just matching that first one, our first string hat cat matches hat. Our second string, where the word cat comes first, matches cat. And that makes sense, right? Because we said we want to find a match, one match for either the word hat or the word cat. So with our regular expression building, we can see it starts out really simple. We can just match, see if this letter occurs somewhere in our string. But then we can get really, really complicated. We can do all sorts of fancy things. Let's create a new project. This is going to be another console app. And for this one, we're going to call this character classes. Now, as you guys get out there and you start looking at regular expressions, we have a little assignment, and it's a real little assignment to create a form, set up some regular expressions to do some editing of things, like the phone number and different things like that. Well, it's pretty easy to Google what's a regular expression to match a phone number, but we really don't need to have a regular expression that validates an international phone number with 47 different countries and things like that. We want to be thinking about how would you build your own regular expression to match things. So remember, this assignment is not a Google search assignment. It's a build a regular expression yourself using information to validate this input data. So it's one that's hard to not just Google and say, oh, look at this awesome regular expression I found. We're going to put in that using system.text.regular expressions. And I'm going to use my static system console so I don't have to keep typing that. And then for this one, we're going to start out with our test string. And we're going to set it equal to ABC, comma, DEF, comma, 1, 2, 3. That's an interesting string. We'll do a right line statement that says the test string is, and then we'll output it. Okay, so parameter 0, we want our test string to be output. We want it to be embedded within double quotes. Hence, we have the slashes as escape characters to make all that print out that way. So the first thing we want to do is find the digits. So I'm going to do a right line with a heading, match any digit. And then our output, we're going to create a method called display matches. And what we want to pass to that thing this first time is going to be our test string. And then we're going to pass it an absolute /D. So remember that @ sign Gives us an absolute string, and we don't have to worry about escape sequences and things like that. So let's create that method. It's going to be static. We expect to have a string that we'll call input and a string that is our expression. That makes sense. Those are the things that we need. And in this one, we're just going to do our for each loop so that we don't have to keep recreating that for each loop. For each regex match in regex.matches, what do we want to do a regex on? Our input string, comparing it to our expression. And for each of those, we'll do a write of our regex match. Within our method, after our for each loop, let's write out a blank line. I guess go to a new line. Yeah, we want to go to a new line. Since we're just doing write statements there in that for each loop. So that'll take us to a new line to start out our next one. So the first thing that we have coded in here, we've already got a regular expression match going on. We're looking for the letter D, right? So we're saying the test string we're using is our ABCDEF123, and the expression we passed is /D. So let's run that. Oops, I'm still running my old one. So let's change this to run my character classes. Well, I was typing things and saying the wrong thing, wasn't I? Because in our comments, we said we're going to match any digit. And then I said, oh, this /D is going to match the D character. It was not, was it? It was matching any digit. And it found within our string the digits 1, 2, and 3. So that /D, I was just saying the wrong thing. That's not what it's doing. So the backslash, or the regular slash, I should say, says this is a special type of match. I want to duplicate that. So let's see, I'm going to copy those 3 lines and paste them. And this time, we're going to find anything that isn't a digit. So instead of doing the /lowercase d, we're going to do uppercase D. Oh, regular expressions don't really have a lot of meaning, do they? We have to really search to see what things mean. I'm going to run this again. And now I see the lowercase d gave me 1, 2, 3. The uppercase D gave me the ABC and the DEF, and I need to fix my comments. It shouldn't say match any digit that second time. It should say match any non-digit. So as we build our regular expression, we can get really, really specific about things. Let's do one more. Here we'll find any word. Find any word character. So I'm going to say match any word character. And we're going to change our search to /W. Now let's run it. It found some words, A, B, C, D, E, F, and 1, 2, 3. Let's do one more. In this example, I want to match characters from A to F. To pass in our matches parameter, we don't have to use the, oops, something weird was going on. We don't have to use the @ sign because we aren't going to do any sort of special characters in our string that could cause us trouble. For a pattern match, we just enclose the characters within square brackets. So that should give us any characters from A to F. So it is a range, and it is knowing that we want to match character data because we're inside the square brackets. So every piece of information that we give to the regular expression builder is meaningful. I'm going to run this again. And now we see that in our match or our test string, the only characters that we have from A to F are A, B, and C. Now, how could we make it match the uppercase? We could add them. We'd have to add them within the same square brackets, though, A-F. And then we would see lowercase and uppercase matching. So how could I tell whenever I'm in my code and I'm just running this, we're out of time, but how can I tell if the pattern found a match or not? Could you grab the return value? Right now we're printing the return value, but you could just grab that and put it in a variable. And as long as your variable wasn't empty, you would know that you got something, right? That you found a match. There's also some return codes and things that the regular expression methods will give you to let you know if something matched or not. That web document that's there in Canvas gives you a lot more information. You don't need a lot more depth to your knowledge on this subject. Like I said, that assignment will ask you to create a few regular expressions. We want you to know that regular expression exists, know how to implement them, and know how to research the topic if you needed more information so that you could get everything there. I'm going to take a look at our web project over the break because I realized that it was using that other database. See if I can get it working. If anybody else wants to, you're welcome to too, in any of those sample projects because they're pretty involved in getting things to work. And I'll bring it back to you when we come back. For the break, I hope you just enjoy yourself, do some practicing if you want. In Canvas, oops, yes I do. I know we're out of time and I won't see you Wednesday. Your final should be showing up, the MTA certification. If you look at the MTA preparing for your exam, I'll get it unlocked for you. This page will show you a lot of different references and resources and things to prepare for your exam, because I don't want you to be nervous trapped at home all of Thanksgiving that you don't have stuff to do. So, but we're in pretty good shape. Need you to relax, let your brain form all of these connections for all of these things you've been learning. So anytime you wake up at 3 in the morning and you just really need to open Visual Studio, go for it. But otherwise, try to get a good rest and relaxation. And I know I'll see a lot of you tomorrow, but if I don't, have a great Thanksgiving and let me know if you need anything. I'll see you in a week or two. Everybody okay at home? They're still there. Okay, I'm going to end this thing. You guys have a great week.